So now we are at the classical position. So d4, d5, c4, e6, knight c3, knight f6. Probably 99% of the games played in the beginning of the 20th century or in the first quarter of the 20th century started like that. Maybe less than 99%, but we're talking about overall majority of the games. It was not only a fashion, it was the only way to develop the pieces. So that's for many, many years, for 2 or 3 generations, the chess players didn't know about other ways of developing pieces. And the great examples were there. You had greatest players of that time, world champions, employing this defense. And with only deviation available at the time, which was a Tarra's defense, Queen's Gambit, classical Queen's Gambit, was the defense employed in all major competitions. And of course, all amateurs, all players in the chess clubs in different quarters of the world, in Vienna, in Berlin, in Paris, in London, in New York, in Russia, they all looked at these openings. There were some pioneers at the time that tried different openings, but not the other openings could actually replace Queen's Gambit in popularity only after Alekhine-Capablanca match, which could be considered be the greatest match ever played within the parameters or within the framework of the classical Queen's Gambit. Just to remind you that 33 out of 34 games of that match were played on that territory. 33 out of 34. Only in game 1, Capablanca played e4 and lost with white. And then he returned to d4, and Alekhine never deviated from the first d4 in the entire long match in Buenos Aires in 1927. I think that due to the fact that the opening duels were reduced to that territory, this match was not considered to be the greatest achievement of these two players. And only the recent analysis that I published in my latest book, My Great Predecessors, analyzing the match from perspectives of Capablanca and Alekhine in different chapters. From Capablanca eyes and Alekhine eyes, so Buenos Aires from these two different angles, I discovered that was a great event. That was a really great event, and it's demonstrated the class, the mastery of these greatest players in the history of chess that could create so much chess treasure out of so-called desert of classical Queen's Gambit. But it was not just a desert. It's a desert for a novice. It's a desert for just, a frequent traveler who suddenly discovered himself or herself in the midst of the desert. In fact, it's a place which could blossom if you know how to dig out or where to find water or where to go. So before we be looking at the match, Alekhine-Capablanca, which, as I said, was the height of the history of the classical Queen's Gambit in the first half of the 20th century, we could look at some of other stories and some of other great players that introduced big ideas into this opening. So the classical line, of course, here starts with bishop g5. But we should remember that Wilhelm Steinitz, the first world champion, always preferred bishop f4. And there were a number of great games he won trying to play on the queen side. And after bishop e7, e3, castle, he always tried to play c5, gaining space on the Queen's Gambit. And he was successful, even beating once Emmanuel Lasker in 1896 in Moscow. And later we'll have a closer look at this great game. But eventually lines with bishop f4 were eliminated when black recognized that they could play at one point c5, c7, c5, not in this position immediately, but later on. And it was the line was not revived until 60s and of course 70s, when it was introduced by Viktor Korchnoi in his World Championship match against Karpov in 1978 in Baguio. So from that time onward, bishop f4, the ideas was bishop f4, starting with knight f3, then bishop f4, are very popular guests of the chess competitions at every level. And there are many players that play this line. I employed it myself. Karpov played it many times. Vladimir Kramnik, who played and won many beautiful games, and thus contributed more to the popularity of this line. But so far, we want to stick with the classical line, starting with bishop g5, bishop e7, e3, castle, and knight f3. One of the first ideas to simplify the position was introduced by the second world champion, Emmanuel Lasker, who played h6, bishop h4, and knight e4. This is so-called Lasker's defense. So the idea is just to start, exchanging the pieces, due to the fact that black is not having enough space for easy and steady development of its pieces. So that's why black is trying to exchange a couple of light pieces, and then eventually to play either d takes c4, c5, or d takes c4, e6, e5, opening the position and solving the problem of the bishop on c8. Just always remember that even the most complicated openings, they could be all reduced to a couple of fundamental issues that are always in the center of players' agenda. Queen's Gambit, it's a bishop c8 for black. That's why black was always trying to find ways to either exchange the pieces and simplify the position and get a chance of developing this bishop after breaking e6, e5, or playing b6, bishop b7. Again, solving the problem of this bishop, but of course offering white some other potential advantages. So the Lasker's line was the most traditional opening in the first, I would say, 10 to 15 years of the 20th century before the World War I. And it was quite popular. It was even employed by Jose Capablanca in his early games. Just, I would recommend for you to look at his match against American champion Frank Marshall in 1909, where Capablanca crushed him completely without knowing any opening theory and just, playing either Lasker's defense or Tarrasch defense that he knew, or the key openings at the time, and he didn't have even to study openings deeply to demonstrate his overall positional advantage over Frank Marshall, who was too adventurous to resist Capablanca's positional genius.